June 4, 1942, 10:25 a.m., 30 degrees north, 179 degrees west. Flight Petty Officer First Class Hiroshi Tanaka leveled his HED-3A dive bomber at 4,000 meters, 80 kilometers northwest of Midway Atoll. Behind him, Radioman Petty Officer Yamada counted the remaining fuel, 42 minutes to carrier Hiryu. They had launched at 0835 hours. They had hit the American carrier Yorktown with a 250-kilogram bomb. Mission successful. Now they were returning to rearm for the second wave, 70 kilometers out. Tanaka saw 3 massive columns of black smoke rising from the horizon where his fleet should have been. To understand what those smoke columns meant, you need to understand what Tanaka had left behind. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, 248 aircraft. The strike force that had devastated Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier. The same carriers that had ranged across 12,000 kilometers of ocean from Hawaii to Ceylon, destroying everything the Americans and British put in front of them. The mathematics of their dominance were overwhelming. At Pearl Harbor, 353 Japanese aircraft destroyed 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 188 American aircraft in 2 hours. American casualties, 2,403 dead. Japanese casualties, 64. In the Indian Ocean, April 1942, Hidobutai aircraft sank British carrier HMS Hermes, heavy cruisers Cornwall and Dorsetshire, and destroyed 45 Royal Air Force aircraft on the ground in Ceylon. British casualties, 424 dead. Japanese casualties, 17. The ratio spoke for itself. Japanese pilots averaged 800 hours of flight training. Many had combat experience in China since 1937. They flew the A6M0 fighter, faster, more maneuverable, and longer ranged than anything the Americans or British had. Their dive bombers and torpedo bombers consistently hit targets in coordinated strikes that overwhelmed enemy defenses. Tanaka himself had 680 hours in the D-3A dive bomber. He'd participated in strikes against Wake Island, Rabaul, Port Moresby, and now Midway. His bombing accuracy, 73%. Squadron average, 68%. By comparison, American dive bomber pilots at this point averaged 240 flight hours, with many having less than 100 hours in type. The Americans knew they were outmatched. After the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, U.S. Navy assessments were blunt. Japanese carrier pilots were superior in training, experience, and equipment. American strategy wasn't to outfight the Japanese. It was to outproduce them and hope coordinated numbers could overcome individual skill. But production took time, and on June 4, 1942, the Americans had 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the damaged Yorktown, against 4 Japanese fleet carriers with veteran air groups. The mathematics favored Japan. The experience favored Japan. The tactical situation favored Japan, which made what Tanaka was about to see even more incomprehensible. 10:26 a.m., 70 kilometers from the fleet's last known position. 3 pillars of smoke. Black. Massive. Rising thousands of meters into the clear Pacific sky. "Sir," Yamada's voice crackled through the intercom. "That's not normal screening smoke." Tanaka knew. Destroyer smoke screens were white, designed to obscure fleet movements. This smoke was black, the kind that came from burning aviation fuel and exploding ordnance. He pushed the throttle forward. The Nakajima Sakai 12 engine responded, pulling the D-3A to 370 kilometers per hour. His fuel situation was now a concern. Going full throttle reduced his margin, but he needed to see what had happened. 10:32 a.m., 50 kilometers out. Through his binoculars, Tanaka could see individual ships. The formation was scattered, not the tight defensive box they'd maintained for 6 months. And the smoke? It was coming from the carriers themselves. "Count them," Tanaka ordered. Yamada scanned the horizon. I see carrier Hiryu. She's not burning." "But sir," his voice went quiet. "I count 3 burning carriers." 3 burning carriers. Impossible. The Kido Butai had never lost a carrier. Not at Pearl Harbor, Not in the Indian Ocean. Not at Coral Sea. Carrier Shoho had been sunk at Coral Sea. Yes, but Shoho was a light carrier, a converted seaplane tender with a makeshift air group. These were fleet carriers. Akagi, flagship of the First Air Fleet, Vice Admiral Nagumo's command ship. Kaga, 34,000 tons, 90 aircraft. Soryu, the fastest carrier in the fleet. All burning. 10:38 a.m., 30 kilometers out. Tanaka descended to 2,000 meters for a better view. What he saw made no tactical sense. Akagi was burning from bow to stern, not just fires, exploding fires. Secondary explosions rippled across her flight deck every 30 to 40 seconds, sending debris and flames hundreds of meters into the air. Her flight deck, the one Tanaka had launched from less than 2 hours earlier, was twisted metal. Aircraft, dozens of them, burned where they'd been spotted for the second wave. Kaga was worse. Her entire forward flight deck had collapsed inward. Massive holes gaped where bombs had penetrated to the hangar deck below. Black smoke poured from those holes so thick it looked solid. Soryu was listing. Not heavily, perhaps 8 degrees to port, but listing nonetheless. And burning. Always burning. Tanaka counted the destroyers. 7, 8, 9. All clustered around the burning carriers, picking up survivors from the water. Hundreds of men in the ocean, swimming away from ships that were, even from 2,000 meters altitude, clearly doomed. What happened? Yamada's voice was barely a whisper. Tanaka didn't answer. He couldn't. He'd been flying for 92 minutes. When he'd launched at 8:35, the Kido Butai was intact, powerful, invincible. Now, at 10:38, 3 of 4 carriers were dying. 92 minutes. That's all it had taken for American bombs to destroy 6 months of Pacific dominance. Hiryu, Tanaka said, forcing his voice steady. We land on Hiryu. She's still operational. He banked northwest, toward the one carrier that wasn't burning. His fuel gauge showed 31 minutes remaining. Enough. Barely. But as he approached Hiryu from 15 kilometers out, he saw something that made his hands tighten on the control stick. Hiryu's flight deck was crowded, not with rearming operations, with aircraft. Dozens of aircraft. Fighters and dive bombers, packed wing to wing, waiting to land, and circling above Hiryu, stacked from 500 to 3,000 meters, were at least 30 more aircraft, all trying to land on one carrier. Tanaka joined the landing circle at 1,800 meters, behind 12 other aircraft. He watched the flight deck. Hiryu's crew was waving off every other aircraft, trying to create space for landings, but there were too many aircraft and not enough deck space. The mathematics were brutal. Hiryu's deck could land 1 aircraft every 2 minutes under optimal conditions. That meant 60 minutes to recover 30 aircraft. Tanaka's fuel showed 29 minutes. He wouldn't make it. Neither would most of the pilots circling above him. Tanaka didn't know it yet, but what had destroyed his carriers wasn't luck. It was American industrial coordination, arriving at exactly the right moment to exploit a single Japanese tactical decision. 10:52 a.m. Tanaka's fuel gauge read 19 minutes. He was still circling at 1,800 meters, watching Hiryu's flight deck. Below him, 6 other aircraft were also circling, their fuel running out just like his. Tanaka recognized 2 of them, Lieutenant Hashimoto's Zero and another D-3A from his own squadron. Hiryu had stopped landing operations. On the flight deck, crew were respotting aircraft, pushing them forward to make room for the next group. But it was too slow, far too slow. Tanaka did the math. 6 aircraft ahead of him in the landing pattern. 2 minutes per landing. 12 minutes. His fuel, 19 minutes. He might make it. Barely. But then, at 10:54 a.m., he saw them. American dive bombers, high, maybe 4,000 meters, 13 of them, in 3 divisions, positioning for attack runs. On Hiryu, the last operational carrier. Hiryu's combat air patrol, the Zeros that should have been intercepting, were below, refueling on the deck or trying to land. Only 3 Zeros were airborne, and they were at 800 meters, too low and too slow to climb to intercept altitude before the Americans dove. Tanaka wanted to scream a warning, but his radio was short-range aircraft to aircraft only. He couldn't reach Hiryu's command center. He could only watch. 10:56:20. The Americans rolled into their dives. Tanaka banked his aircraft to keep them in sight. From 1,800 meters, he had a perfect view of what happened next. 13 SBD Dauntless bombers in a textbook attack. Same technique, same angle, same precision. Hiryu opened fire. Her anti-aircraft guns threw up a wall of shells. One American bomber took a direct hit, disintegrating at 2,000 meters, but the other 12 kept diving. 10:57:05. 4 bombs hit. Tanaka saw the impacts. 1 hit forward, near the number 1 elevator. 2 hits midships. 1 hit aft, near the flight deck arrestor wires. The bombs penetrated, detonated. And just like Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, Hiryu's flight deck erupted in flames. Aircraft on the flight deck, the ones that had just landed, the ones being refueled, ignited. Secondary explosions rippled forward and aft. Within 90 seconds, Hiryu's flight deck was uninhabitable. Tanaka watched pilots ditch their aircraft in the ocean, rather than burn with their fuel exhausted. He watched destroyers race toward the ditching sites, trying to recover pilots before they drowned or were strafed by American fighters. He watched the Kidobutai, the invincible strike force that had dominated the Pacific for 6 months, die in less than an hour. 10:58 a.m. Tanaka's fuel gauge read 16 minutes. There was nowhere to land. He keyed his radio. "Yamada, we're ditching. Prepare for water landing." "Understood, sir." Tanaka descended to 200 meters, scanning the ocean for a destroyer that could pick them up. He spotted DD Arashi, 4 kilometers northwest of burning Hiryu close enough. He reduced speed to 160 kilometers per hour, trimmed the aircraft for minimum descent rate, and aimed for the water 500 meters ahead of Arashi's bow. 11:02 a.m. Impact. The D-3A hit the water nose high. The deceleration slammed Tanaka forward against his harness. Water sprayed over the canopy. The aircraft floated. Briefly, D-3A dive bombers could float for 2 to 3 minutes if the ditching was clean. Tanaka popped the canopy, climbed out onto the wing. Behind him, Yamada was already inflating the emergency raft. The water was cold. Colder than Tanaka expected, but the raft inflated properly, and they pulled themselves in. Arashi turned toward them, slowing to launch a recovery boat. Tanaka looked back at Hiryu, 5 kilometers away, burning, listing. Destroyers clustered around her, rescuing crew who jumped overboard. 4 carriers, 248 aircraft, the most powerful naval strike force in the world. Gone. In 5 minutes of American dive bombers hitting rearmed aircraft on exposed flight decks. Tanaka was pulled aboard Arashi at 11:17 a.m. The destroyer's deck was crowded with survivors, pilots, flight deck crew, engineers. Men from Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and now Hiryu. He found Lieutenant Hashimoto near the aft gun mount, still in his flight suit, staring back at the burning carriers. "What happened?" Tanaka asked. Hashimoto didn't answer for a long moment. Then, "We were rearming. All 4 carriers. Aircraft on deck. Armed, fueled. The Americans dove while we were rearming. They caught us at the worst possible moment." "No." Hashimoto turned to look at Tanaka. "They created the worst possible moment. Their torpedo bombers attacked first, drew our fighters down. Then their dive bombers arrived high while our fighters had no altitude. They coordinated it." Tanaka wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because Hashimoto was right. The Americans had better coordination, better timing, better systems. June 4th, 1942, 1500 hours. Tanaka stood on Arashi's deck, watching 4 pillars of smoke mark where the Kidobutai used to be. Akagi would sink at 5 a.m. the next morning. Kaga sank at 19:25 that evening. Soryu sank at 19:13. Hiryu would burn through the night and sink at 9 a.m. on June 5th. 4 fleet carriers, sunk, in a single day. The Americans lost 1 carrier, Yorktown, which sank 3 days later after being torpedoed by a submarine. The mathematics were brutal. Japan lost 4 carriers and 248 aircraft. America lost 1 carrier and 150 aircraft. But America was building new carriers, Essex-class fleet carriers, bigger and faster than anything Japan could produce. Japan couldn't replace 4 fleet carriers. Not in 1942, not in 1943, possibly not ever. Tanaka understood, standing on that destroyer deck, that individual skill didn't matter anymore. Japanese pilots might have 800 flight hours versus American pilots with 240. But the Americans had systems, radar detection, coordinated strike packages, industrial production that could replace losses faster than Japan could inflict them. The war wasn't over. Japan would fight for 3 more years. But Midway proved something fundamental. Courage and skill couldn't defeat industrial systems and coordinated timing. Tanaka had returned from a successful strike, expecting to land, rearm, and launch again. Instead, he'd returned to find his fleet destroyed in 5 minutes by pilots who, on paper, were inferior. The 5 minutes at Midway didn't just sink 4 carriers. They proved that the American way of war, standardized, systematized, industrialized, could overcome individual excellence. Japan had the better pilots. America had the better system. And at Midway, the system won.